Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ben Phillip. For those who don't know me, I'm the Head of Competitions and Performance at BUCS, and I'd like to welcome you all to this BUCS Presents webinar, exploring how tech can support your sport delivery. I've had over 70 of you registered to attend. It's amazing to see representation from over 55 different institutions. Today we're joined by two companies through our new partnership with Enterprise Ireland. We're really pleased to have Enterprise Ireland as a BUCS partner. They represent so many exciting companies from Ireland who are looking to do business in the UK. Our session will focus on two companies operating at the cutting edge of sports technology, their current work with universities and also future opportunities for their technology. Amy Palmer from Enterprise Ireland will kick us off with a brief introduction to the role they play in supporting Irish companies. Following on from that, Dara Whelan, the Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder of Output Sports, will be presenting a demonstration of Output technology and discussing its use with Dr. Mark Helm from Sheffield Hallam University. For our third session, we'll be joined by David Van Zadem, the CEO of Head Diagnostics, and Sam Stewart from Northumbria University, who will be discussing the uses of their diagnostics tool, their current work alongside contact sport teams, and the potential for future applications. Finally, we'll conclude with a full panel Q&A session. We do have some questions that you submitted prior to today, but feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A function that should now be open to ask any questions during the presentation, and we'll collate them for the end. If you can, let me know if it's for a specific one of the team, that would be great, just so I can direct them to the right person. Before we do start, there are a few housekeeping rules just to highlight. Firstly, as you will see, this webinar is being recorded. Therefore, it will be available to view again, and you'll be able to share with friends or colleagues afterwards. The webinar is going to be an hour long, and we'll do our very best to keep to time on that. And finally, please do share any insights you've learned from this on your social media platforms. Our handle is @BUCSport on all social platforms. Right, let's get started. And to start, I'd like to welcome Amy to the screen.
Amy, everyone, sorry, there's a little technical issue. Now, just bear with me one moment. Apologies for that. 1 second. Sorry, I seem to have lost the link. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So good afternoon, I'm Amy. I'm a market executive here at Enterprise Ireland. I work across our sports tech sector. So Enterprise Ireland is the Irish government agency for trade and innovation. We operate across 40 international offices, 2 in the UK, including London and Manchester. We support Irish companies to help them start, innovation, scale. In 2020, Enterprise Ireland invested 48 million in our startup companies. This was across the main investment sector of our tech companies. In the UK, we're here to help build long-lasting relationships between our Irish companies and leading UK organisations. We're a team of 20 sector specialists with over 5,000 companies exporting to the UK. And we're here to help your university source a strategic partner and find a solution to your business needs. Enterprise Ireland work with a really exciting group of sports tech companies. These are in areas of athlete tracking, concussion analysis, ticketing and event management, facilities and club management systems. We're going to be sending out a directory of all these companies to you all post-webinar. We've invested in these companies ourselves, and they're already working with a really impressive group of universities and professional sports clubs throughout the UK. My details are on screen there, and we would love for you to get in touch with us if there's any companies in particular who have taken your interest. And our social media details are also on screen there. We would love for you to connect with us and stay in touch with us for any of our sports tech industry news. So that is it for me, and I'm going to pass you back to Ben.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Amy. Great to hear about Enterprise Ireland's work to open the event and just get a flavour of what it is you and your team do and what you can bring to our partnership. We're delighted to be working with Enterprise Ireland. Excited for this first partnership delivery and expect with the range of organisations that Amy and the team work with, it'll be the first of many to come. So we'll now move on to the first of today's technology organisations, and that is Output Sports. So I'd like to welcome Dara and Mark.
Perfect. Thanks a million for that, Ben. And I'd also like to thank the BUCS team and the EI team for not only organising this webinar, but also giving us the chance to kind of present at it as well. So just a really brief background about myself and Output, and then we'll be talking to Mark as well, where he can kind of fill you in through his background as well a little bit later on. But my name's Dara Whelan. I'm one of the co-founders of Output Sports and the Chief Scientific Officer. It actually originated as part of myself and one of my co-founders, Martin O'Reilly, our PhD work. So we're actually a university spin-out, so kind of know the space very, very well, and would have worked with a lot of not only teams in the sporting side of University College Dublin here in Ireland, but also as well on the teaching and research side of things as well. We basically spent our PhDs looking at wearable sensing technology and sensor technology as a mechanism of assessing a wide variety of performance metrics with it. And following the end of those PhDs in about 2017, we spent about 2 years speaking to practitioners and trying to understand their needs and trying to fit our research around that. And I know there's actually a couple of people on the call who we would have spoken through in that process, not least Mark actually as well, who've really helped with the development of the technology as well. And then that allowed us to basically release our first product in March 2020, which every time I say, I always smile because it feels like a million years ago, not only just from running a startup, but also from what has happened in the world since with it as well. What I'm going to do really briefly is just give you a quick overview of the technologies, just to put in context, I guess, what we do, and therefore put in context around how Mark has been using the system as well with it. So I'm going to show our system as a whole, which is made up of Capture and Hub. Capture is basically sensor-based technology, which basically is these two things, a phone and a wearable sensor. And that allows you to capture everything as diverse as jumps, balance, ground contact times, barbell velocity, Nordic analysis with it as well, speed gates and light gates functionality in the system. So basically for the practitioners on the call, hopefully you'll get excited by the fact that you can do all of that testing with a system as small as this, basically with it as well, a mobile phone and a small wearable sensor. And then from a kind of budget standpoint as well, hopefully some of you be excited as well, as you can start to see where you get an awful lot of bang for your buck in terms of being able to test lots of different performance metrics with just the one system as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share my screen briefly and show you, first of all, our capture system. So this is our mobile system that basically allows the capture of all the exercise data. And the way it works is the whole system is basically cloud-based with it as well. And that allows you to collect data on a range of different athletes, of whoever you're collecting data with, really simply and effectively, and for all of that data to be pushed to a cloud server so it can be shared and accessed from anywhere as well. We do have wellness metrics into it and tracking of height and weight, but just for time constraints, I might just show you one or two of our objective markers, which is predominantly what the system is about. And as I kind of alluded to in that introduction, one of our main differentiators is we test lots of different things. So I'd be here all day, I think, if I was running through each of these specific tests with you. What I might do is show you one or two to get a feel for the system, and then I'll show you the hub where that data is then housed as well. So one that we see very commonly used across lots of different environments is our power metrics or our counter movement jump metrics. So many of you on the call will know a really good indicative measure of readiness to train or around monitoring fatigue, etc. with it as well. And how it works is basically that I'll be popping the sensor on the foot. So anytime you hit on those instructions, it'll show you where to place the sensor and give you instructions at the same time. literally doing what you saw on the video there, which is popping the sensor on my foot. And then once the sensor's on that body location, all you need to do is do the task and you'll get the jump height out as well. That must be my nerves allowing me to get 28% better than my last jump, which is still not too impressive with it as well. So that data, as I alluded to, is housed then under my athlete profile, which means that I can look back over any of my historical jumps and compare and contrast that, and then see very efficiently where I am in comparison to my longitudinal data over the day, the week, the month. So you can see here, I've set this at ±1 standard deviation as my normative level. I can see I'm just right at the tip of that level, but I can also see periods of maybe when I was fatigued or just peaking at that stage with it as well. That's a good example of a kind of test that the system does, and that'd be very similar to many of our reactive strength index tests with it, our mobility tests with it, our strength endurance tasks, etc. One good example of a rep-based exercise that we capture, and again, very commonly used among an awful lot of our end users, is our barbell velocity functionality. So our barbell velocity functionality works very similar to maybe other devices that you've seen used that will measure the speed of the bar and subsequently what zone an individual is training with or training within. So the way this will work is that you can set minimum thresholds or you can set threshold ranges. So at the moment, I'm going to try and get in between 0.7 and 1 meter per second rep on rep. And that means that when I'm moving the bar, in this case, you can imagine me doing, if I'm hitting the range I want to be in, you can see I'm getting positive reinforcement around the same. If I'm going too slow, I also get that reinforcement around the same with it as well. And at the end of the repetitions or at the end of the set with it as well, what I'll get is summary metrics of how well I've completed those sets with it, as well as rep on rep analysis with it as well. So I can have a look back over any of those repetitions I did in any of the different metrics that we would compute as well. To flag then as well, the other thing with any of those tests with it, it is very easy then to use that in an environment where there may be lots of athletes training with it. Again, probably pretty pertinent to this, where you may have an awful lot of individuals using systems with it. You can very easily quick swap between different athletes, and the next athlete just comes in and completes the task, whether it be a jump or a barbell squat or whatever it might be. Just one last feature I'll show you before taking you into the hub, which is where all this data is stored, is a new feature that we've embedded that actually uses the camera on the phone. You're going to get a pretty horrible picture of myself here. It's basically my front-facing camera with it as well. I'm just going to try and prop it up here, and fingers crossed it'll hold there for me. I'm not full. But basically what this feature is it's a set of light gates, basically you can think of it. So what it will do is it will track my shoulders, and when I go through that line, subsequently when I come back through, and it will give me the time in between those 2 points. So you can imagine in a t-test where you're going out, going left, right, and then coming back through like a single set of timing gates on it. So if I go through that, and then I come back through it again, it will give me that set of time that it took between that stage with it as well. So basically, as you can see there, it's a pretty multifunctional tool, and I've only shown you 3 tested embeds in it as well. But we'll also do things like ground contact times for strides or hurdle hops with it, range of motion testing for physios or for athletic trainers, Nordic analysis as well, reactive strength jumps, stability, so overall functional stability during core exercises or during balance exercises, and then strength endurance and strength pathway tasks, where it will look at the range of motion that a limb goes through in certain tasks, and Mark will be talking about that. What I'm going to do is then just show you where all of that information is then housed, which is within our hub. So this is, again, a cloud-based system, so it doesn't matter where I capture the data using the capture system, it will all be housed within this here with it as well. And what that allows practitioners to do very simply then is to look at individuals' key performance indicators and then set thresholds for those, whether they be in a green zone, an amber zone, or a red zone, and based off percentages or standard deviations. What that allows an individual to do really, really quickly is then quantify those athletes that are in need of attention, because it will top load the person with the most amount of reds, or those who are the top performing athletes by quantifying those with the most amount of greens. And any of that data can be looked at in more depth with it. So if I go into here, I can look at my jumps over, the previous month, over the previous year, amalgamate it, best each month, best each week, etc., with it. And I can also look at things maybe which are more rep-based with it as well, rather than those summary metrics, get more in-depth analysis of the same. So the set that I did before, just there, moving the sensor, I can see that rep-on-rep analysis with it, and also compare different sets against each other to see how I compare set on set with different metrics, whether they be, in this case, maybe mean force or something like that with it as well. All of that can be analysed at an individual level or at a group level. And again, in a university setting, I would imagine this is quite useful, where you can have different sports and then placing the athletes within those, so you can view, our sports science group is the most heavily populated one. I can see all the sports scientists and then look at any of those individuals and compare and contrast them. We also have the ability then to have live leaderboards within that system as well with it. So you'll see probably my jump height, which I've just done there, that will come up through it as well. Anybody who does a jump with the system, no matter where they are in the world, it will actually populate that data. But what we found being used, particularly in actually college environments, is where maybe this is on a screen in the gym and it's driving intent within a session as well. You can also export any of that data, both from a CSV standpoint with it as well, and in exercise, or by athlete or by exercise, or everything together with it. But what we found a lot of individuals doing is exporting it in a report mode, which is basically the ability to generate reports at either an athlete or a group level. And should you be using the same reports, multiple locations with it, it's very easy to save that report then as a template and then literally just generate it out very, very quickly. So this will be our jump height leaderboard, I think, of all time with it. And basically what you'll see is that will generate a report out in a PDF manner, which you can then share with the individual teams, the coaches, the practitioners, or whoever makes the most sense for it to do as well. So just to give you a feel for what that looks like. Once it's generated out, this is our all-time leaderboard, which is, I've just realized, pretty depressing for myself with it. Maybe I shouldn't have led with that one with it. But that's the Output Sports system in a nutshell with it. So Capture gives you the ability to collect lots of different components of fitness with a single wearable sensor or camera-based system with it as well. And because you have one system that can do all of that with it as well, it then allows you to feed that information very, very quickly into into our hub, which allows for the quantification, analysis of that data, live leaderboarding to drive intent, and then report generate as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing those screens, and then I'm going to just talk to Mark a little bit around how they found using the system within Sheffield Hallam with it, to give a bit of context around the same. So Mark, first of all, thanks a million for doing this and helping us out with it as well. But just if you could start off maybe by introducing yourself and your own background as well.
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation, Dara and BUCS. So my name is Dr. Mark Helm. I'm currently a lecturer in sports science, specifically focused on biomechanics and strength and conditioning at Sheffield Hallam University, having just completed my PhD at Leeds Beckett University in sports coaching. So I'm more familiar with the BUCS world and those associated teams and practitioners that would find themselves in university sport. My background is pretty varied. So I spent about 13 to 14 years in FE, and I've been an S&C coach alongside my academic practice since S&C was a thing in the UK, so about the early 2000s. So I've done 100,000 hours plus in the gym, plus my own research, plus teaching S&C to various students at various levels across level 1 to level 7. So you pretty much name it around university life, I've seen it and done it. My research was mainly in a little bit of biomechanics, but my goal was to look at strength and strength asymmetries within rugby league players. So I did some quantification of research in the lab, look at the rear foot elevator split squat, and then I've gone out to the field and measured injuries and strength and speed and power in the field. So kind of in terms of looking at an applied S&C practitioner, researcher and academic, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So, and I can attest to that, having seen you present at a conference and then seeing you train an individual group of teams as well. So it's great, and that's what we have all been about, an output of combining that research expertise around with that practitioner and usability. So that's been great to partner around that. Would you be able to talk about how Sheffield Hallam have been using the Output Sports system then to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a challenging year to be able to use anything really. So where we would typically use a piece of technology like output would be thinking about what skills they would leave with and what practice is needed by them. So typically we've used it for VBT type teaching. So students go and collect barbell velocity and jump-based activities. That could be an RSI or a loaded counter movement jump, doing force velocity profiling, and just getting students to be comfortable in collecting velocity data, just in the mechanics of how to get it, where to put sensors, and then getting more comfortable with what a desired range might be for velocity, for hypertrophy, for strength, for power, for example. And then handling the data. So you've just described some really neatly there some of the functions of report generation, whereas we would probably challenge our students to collect reports and then look at how appropriate those reports are for the things they are wanting to do. So that's from teaching them to go from the course to practice. And then the other side of things, being an academic, would be to look at dissertation students. So it's a really fantastic tool for the students to be able to go and collect some really good, meaningful data quickly, easily, ethically. That's another thing, without having to be queuing up left, right, and centre to book biomechanic lab time. So that's been a real game changer for S&C students to be able to collect biomechanical data without having to use Kistler force plates and Vicon or Qualisys and all these other different tools. And that then starts to bleed out into how they can use that with more and more people. So we're putting more tools in more hands more of the time. The really kind of important thing for us was that kind of group level functionality. One of the things that's become more and more evident in how we go about using technology within teaching is GDPR. So being able to set up groups as an academic member of staff, teaching group A, B, C, and then having codes. So we can assign a student a particular code that, unless they decide to go and tell the world what their particular designated code is, nobody else knows who they are. So we can collect a lot of data from teaching and learning practices as well. So the students can use it, they know what their data is. We can release it to the students so they can manipulate the data and learn from it. We can look at it from an academic point of view. If we can embed some of our research activity to teaching and learning, that's even better. Without breaking the GDPR concerns. And I know certainly from a team point of view, I've been a person as well that's gone knocking on doors in the university sport gyms. Can I do some research on your athletes? I need to do some real world research. I need to come and test you guys. So having that kind of confidentiality and usability, me bringing the technology into the university team training space, has been really helpful. So it's been quite a diverse tool for us, and it's opened up a lot of opportunities to do things that a pure biomechanics lab wouldn't have allowed us to do.
And I know you've worked an awful lot in that practitioner space. I know a lot of people on the call will be, working with teams day in, day out as well. So it'd be really useful to kind of get your thoughts around the implementation of the system in that type of environment and how it may differ slightly from the academic or teaching side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been an S&C coach for, as you can tell by the hairstyle, about 20 years. Mainly in semi-professional in youth sports. So I don't have a lot of time. And I work in rugby league, as you can tell by the northern accent. So we don't have a lot of money either. So whatever we do has to be A, cost effective, and B, time effective. And it has to have an impact. So I can find something that's cheap and cheerful, but if it doesn't help, then there's no point. So I remember you guys came over in the early product development days, and I showed you one of the sessions. You and Martin looked at each other and went, this strap ain't going to cut it. It's like, this should be more robust. Like, our guys were going at it hard for 25 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Yeah, and the turnover was massive. But I can't say every rep and I can't say everybody doing everything. So it's really helpful to be able to have some tools I can put in certain players' hands, and because of time restrictions, I wouldn't necessarily use it with every person at every repetition. There are some guys who are so down the kind of pecking order in terms of what they can do, measuring their velocity, measuring their range of movement. It's not needed. but there are some athletes who would benefit from that additional level of depth and detail. So I put the velocity measure on their thigh to make sure they hit the range of movement. Yeah, great. You can put weight on the bar, brilliant. But I've just measured the fact that as soon as you do that, your range of movement drops by 15 degrees. I want you to get that load down, that extra. If that doesn't say 80 degrees by the end of it, you have to get the weight back off again. So it's having that level of analytics that supports coaching and not being that tablet coach who just looks at a screen all the time. It's being selective about how and when and who I use that with. So they get a more meaningful impact. There's objective data that I can then use to show how we've progressed, but it hasn't interfered or detracted from the quality of the session, and that can be a concern. Yeah, I don't want to be the laptop coach who doesn't look at an athlete or has a conversation with somebody. I can give them the tablet, I can give them the output, and it's robust enough and simple enough for them to use on their own, and I can get it cloud-based afterwards.
See, Ben has appeared, which means that our time is coming to an end, but just a couple of things just to flag at the end of it. It's so great to hear you talk about that process of, we've seen it work in environments of, elite sports, like literally working with the FA and working with Leinster Rugby and working with NFL #1 draft picks, and where they have all of this technology available. But also what we've been really excited about is to see the use of the technology in maybe environments where exactly that budget might come in to impact it, with its space environments and space constrictions as well. So what we've been really exciting, and it's always been kind of at the core of everything we've wanted to do at Output, is to democratize or ubiquitize sports performance testing. And hopefully you'll have seen in the beginnings of this how we're going about doing that process. Just to finish up, again, I'll just share this. Should anyone want to see any more information regarding the system with it as well? I think I've got the website there shared, just maybe not, yeah, perfect. Outputsports.com is the best place to go. One thing we didn't touch on at all was around the validity and reliability today with it, but feel free to kind of have a look in around those and test with it. And for anyone who wants any more information with it, feel free to get in contact with the contact details below. Hello@Output Sports, you'll always get us on that. And should you want to see more of that, arrange a demo there as well. One of us will hop on and show you the system. So I'll stop sharing there. So again, thanks so much again for all the time, and look forward to talking again at the Q&A at the end of the session. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both for those insights, Darren and Mark. Really interesting to know about the system and its uses. I'm sure that the practitioners on the call have noted loads of specific opportunities for how they could use that system. But I think for me, it's the multifunctional one system solution combined with the ease of use really leapt out to me for using athletes. And I think it was really good there to hear from you, Mark, around the increased capacity for delivering teaching. So that's grand. And as you said, we'll see you for the Q&A at the end. Just a reminder for everyone that if you have any questions, please do just add them into the chat, and we'll collate them for the pre-questions for the Q&A session. We'll now move on to our second organisation, Head Diagnostics, and I'm very happy to introduce to you David and Sam.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
So good afternoon, everybody on the call, and it's a pleasure to be interviewing Sam, who's down in Northumbria University. I'm up in Dublin, and we're avoiding the COVID flights. So welcome to the call. Sam, this call is about concussion and what's happening in the world of concussion across university, across diagnostics generally, and biomarkers that are out there and coming down the line. So let me just begin with Northumbria University. And in terms of the projects that you're doing there at the moment, what are some of the key areas of interest that you're looking at the moment?
Thanks, David. So at Northumbria Uni, we have I direct the Physiotherapy Innovation Laboratory here, and we have several studies that are all quite relevant to sports medicine and particularly concussion. Our main concussion project that we have relates to the use of objective measures in terms of different wearable sensors, eye tracking technologies, and a variety of other objective measures that we're comparing to standard subjective tests. We do a lot of different testing to basically advance clinical practice in terms of assessments, as well as then rehabilitation practice as well. We use these technologies with a variety of sports performers, but also neurological populations as well. And really, we are looking for the development of new devices and technologies that can aid clinical practice.
Excellent. And we know there's a lot of subjectivity in concussion, and we're actually looking for a lot more objectivity. Just in terms of how we met, Sam and I met through concussion, a third-party company actually called Danu Sports, which is coincidentally another Enterprise Island company doing gait analysis, brought us together. And Sam and I shared some notes on concussion and what we are doing. He became very interested in our device and our technology, so much so that he offered us to co-fund a PhD student in Northumbria University for 3 years to bring our project and to validate our device a little bit further. So that's very exciting, and we've got that to look forward to over the next 3 years. So Sam, just moving back into concussion, let's just set the scene here for the 70 or so folks that are on the phone, on the call here today. Can you briefly describe, just high level for the non-clinicians in the world, what is a concussion? Okay, what are the symptoms? What's the problem with going back to play when you have a concussion, and how does it affect your general long-term return to play?
Yeah, I suppose they're all complicated questions, aren't they, as well, David? I think that's the thing. But concussion generally is results from a blow to the head, and it's a traumatic brain injury at its core, and it results in largely a temporary loss of what we would classify as normal brain function. And medically in the UK, we kind of describe it as a transient alteration in brain function. And we do that because we know that so many people within a 2 to 4 week period will pretty much recover based upon our subjective clinical rating scales that we use at the moment. Concussion can also relate to rapid acceleration and deceleration of the head as well, such as during whiplash. So sometimes if someone gets a rugby tackle and they get hit in the neck, sometimes they end up with a concussion injury as well. Symptoms can vary with individuals, but largely the kind of early stages, you're looking at things like confusion, feeling nauseous, vision deficits and problems with vision, blurriness, balance problems that people present with. And as I say, most of these symptoms may clear up in a few weeks, but there are people who do go on to have what we call post-concussion syndrome, which can last much longer than a 12-week period is when we would classify that. And they may have balance problems, various dizziness and various other symptoms that prolong and actually impact on their quality of life. Now, concussion is a serious problem, and we're seeing it more and more recognised in not just amateur sport or elite sport. We're more and more recognised at every level of sporting activity in various different sports as well. I mean, you only have to watch the Sweden game yesterday, where one of the players got hit in the head with the ball, and he looked like he definitely had a concussion and probably shouldn't have went back on. But the difficulty with it is that the markers that we use aren't sensitive enough at the moment. And the result of that is that if we don't pick up a concussion, players can go back on to play. They can potentially get a secondary injury. Now in rugby, statistics show that if even a player goes back to play within the same season, up to 60% of them can either get a secondary concussion injury within that season, or they can get a musculoskeletal injury. And that's because we're basically just not picking up on the deficits that these people have. If they do get a secondary concussion injury, that is incredibly serious, because they could potentially go on to get secondary impact syndrome. And that is a fatal issue of swelling on the brain that occurs after a second impact.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. I mean, it's like someone having a TIA, transient ischemic attack, pulled hamstring. It feels like sometimes that concussion may not be noticed, so you can't actually identify it and then treat it and recover, as you're saying, because the biomarkers are too subjective. There's not really a good audit trail of the injury, certainly not at amateur level. And this is where we can potentially help, and we can bring more objective biomarkers to support these different areas. So then, just you're a specialist in concussion. I know you've worked in the US across different areas, etc., and you must have seen some of the things that are coming down the track in terms of eye tracking, things like looking at smooth pursuit, looking at the latest developments in blood biomarkers. And we know some of the big companies in the world have released biomarkers to pick up bleed on the brain, not so much on the mild traumatic side. It's more on bleed and the more dangerous issues. But what kind of interesting biomarkers have you seen coming through recently from the US into Europe, or vice versa for that matter?
There's, I suppose, a range of biomarkers that are being tested out. There's a few biomarkers that are being at the far end now, where they're actually having results come out and potentially being uptaken by sporting bodies and various other people. My work in the States, we dealt with kind of college level athletes as well as the Department of Defense, and we worked on several Department of Defense funded studies. And the markers we were using there were a variety of markers, from use of wearable sensors for balance assessments and walking assessments and various other things, all the way to saliva markers of things like microRNA. You're talking about blood tests in terms of GFAP and various other markers that we might see in blood diagnostics. Even electrical activity in the brain, so EEG measures have been picked up, and there's even companies that are running in the States that relate to that, such as BrainScope and various other devices. And eye tracking is another thing that I've noticed recently. Obviously, our World Rugby have picked up on that, and they've got a new eye tracking device that they're using within their environment. It's a test that takes several minutes to conduct. And there are a variety of markers that we could potentially use, because largely with TBI, it's similar to kind of the dementia scope, whereby there's probably going to be a battery of biomarkers that individuals need to be assessed on. And then if they meet certain criteria for certain markers, then they would be really clinically diagnosed with a concussion incident, and then go down the correct rehabilitation pathway. And
Yeah.
I think there's such a big push for these markers because of the subjectivity currently of the clinical assessments that we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge industry globally. I mean, up to 70 million concussions a year globally across, across sport, across general falls in the home, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a massive market, and a lot of companies looking at this space. I mean, just from our side, one thing we're trying to do at Head Diagnostics, so just for everyone's information, we're producing an intrinsic physiological biomarker for the assessment of concussion. It also has other applications across other disease states, for example, Parkinson's disease, but we're looking at a marker to measure brain function at a specific point in time. So if you could imagine that you're pitch side, whether it be in the third 15, soccer, rugby, netball team, whatever it may be, or in the professional team playing for your country, we have a marker that we're working on that can do a test in 3 seconds, and we're doing studies in this space right now. So just to give you an example, so this is a pretty practical example. It's a handheld device we're producing, and we literally point it at the eye. So we ask the patient or the player to look forward. We click the button, and a tiny light shines into the eye for 3 seconds, and then on the screen over here will come the actual number, which is measured in hertz, and we're measuring a level of brain function at that point of time emanating from your brainstem. So we're measuring a fine ocular movement in the eye. Been a number of studies done previously in this space across different cognitive impairments stages and different disease states and injury states. And so we're extending now onto those studies, and hence we were going to be working with SAM through concussion. The main thing we're trying to do is see if we can produce this test that is going to be 3 seconds pitch side. So that's where we think we're quite different. We're different to the 2-minute test, or the the blood test or the saliva test that may have to go back to the lab and spin, because they're not really pitch side yet. So we think we can complement those tests as well. So and I'll come into this later in the call, we talk about a multimodal approach. But let's just move on for a bit. So we have a very exciting 3-year project with you, Sam. Can you give the audience some idea of a quick outline of what this project's going to look like, and where you're going to take our device and who you're going to engage us with?
Yeah, so really the 3-year project will start coming at the end of the year now, and we're going to be doing baseline screenings with all of our university teams. We've got 6 teams here, 4 adult men's and obviously 2 women's teams. We'll also try and link up with some of our other local partners in the Premier League and various other places as well. We'll be doing baseline, and then we'll be following people up across the season, looking for acute head injuries that people will have, and we'll follow those individuals up on a kind of daily and weekly basis after they've had their head injuries, and then also pre-season to test whether the impact of subconcussive injuries over the course of the season has an impact on this measure as well. And we'll also have a healthy control cohort that we'll recruit as well.
Yeah, that's super. I mean, this is really exciting stuff for Head Diagnostics. Being in a new market, for example, with the UK, working with a really organized structure like yourselves. And that's why we're investing in the PhD student. So we want to further the care pathway, improve the care pathway, and provide diagnostics both pitch side and for hospital and emergency departments. So just switching gears a little bit then, let's get into the nuts and bolts of concussion. So let's see what's happening right now in university sports. So we're not talking professional as much. We know what's going on there. We know about HIA. We know they're doing some eye testing, eye tracking technology at the moment, and we'll be playing in that space shortly as well. But let's talk about what happens to the second team or the third team player on a Saturday. They go and they get a bang. They're brave and courageous. They play on. They get a headache. No one notices. The physio may or may not be there. They go back that night. They start feeling ill. They have post-concussive symptoms. They may or may not go to the A&E. And we know that generally 50% of people only turn up in A&E. But if they do, they clog up the system anyway, because most MTBIs, mild traumatic injuries, are assessed and then sent home anyway. So what happens in a university setting right now? How's it tracked? How are players monitored? Is there a system? Is there a database, etc.?
So at the minute, I mean, if it's not a first team player, depending on the university, it probably have different structures in place, which is one of the issues really. That there's not really standardized processes around anything related to amateur sport, or even, like I say, university level. And it would be surprising if a second or third team player did have medical professionals at the grounds. They may or may not have physiotherapy or sports therapists there at the ground. But it's likely that person would probably have to make the decision for themselves as to whether they had a concussion injury at the time. They may even have to make the decision after the game themselves again, whether they need to go to an accident emergency department to be assessed as well. And then, like you say, if they do go to an A&E department, the likelihood is they'll be told, come back in 3 months' time if you've still got symptoms. And if they don't, they'll continue on with their normal daily activities. But we don't have any we've implemented this at Northumbria, and we have records on individuals now, but we don't have any really substantial way of doing follow-ups with players. They may or may not get a SCAT assessment, depending on whether they're physiotherapist or medical professionals involved in the teams do that. It may be a SCAT at baseline, and then a SCAT if they get a follow-up, but that may take a few days or if not a week before they get that assessment. If they're not in a first or second team, if they're in one of the lower teams. So really it's a little bit, not all over the place, but a little bit unstandardized and needs a little bit more thought really across the whole system.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a potential good opportunity for objective biomarkers, perhaps a platform play where we have everyone in the university who could be in contact sports, tracked through their university life, and then they can take that record with them onto whether it be a professional life later on or into just social rugby for your club in your province, etc. So let's talk a little bit what's happening in the USA on this same front. So we've got college football. We know, college football's there's a lot of exciting hits going on in college football. We know about all the NFL issues they had historically, and there's been a lot of things happening in that space over the years. So when you worked in the US, what happened there, and why is it becoming so important in the US in different states, and what are they doing about it?
Well, in the US, obviously, it's a little bit different from the UK, but they have a lot of legislation around this now, and they've spent, sporting governing bodies have spent a lot of money on trying to basically get markers and get research done to basically help players with assessments, but also looking at longer term issues that players may or may not have, looking at things, associations with previous head injuries relating to things like dementia, CTE, those sorts of areas as well. And the US, really, the collegiate system has a much better system than what we currently have in the UK. We have partnership with Michigan State University, and we do a lot of concussion projects with them at the moment. And they have a mandatory baseline assessment for players, which involve a battery of different tests, and then they get followed up as if they were professional rugby players. And it is a very strict system because they are aware of the problems, because there has been quite a lot of work done over there in terms of concussions and sport.
Yeah, no, I know I have a few colleagues, and even at schoolgirl football level, that they take it quite seriously in certain states, and there's legislation now that it's almost a crime not to follow and track concussion. And I think it's probably happened over the years because of all the litigation that's gone on, etc. So it's driving a different mindset, and it's been driven from within, from government actually, in government policy. So at Head Diagnostics, what we believe there's going to be a multimodal approach to concussion. I don't believe there's going to be one single biomarker. It's not just going to be our device, for example. We would see something that's quick. So if it's just 10 minutes in professional rugby, it'll be, we still have the HIA, potentially we have multimodal approach, then we have a device, potentially our device. Maybe there's a quick eye tracking test combined with a finger prick blood test looking at GFAP or S100B or one of those blood biomarkers that can distinguish any change from a concussion perspective. So we see this working as some quick pitch side tests that could be done down the tunnel or back in the change room even, and then the player could come back. That's in the professional side. And then what we see just happen in the amateur side, a little bit more structure and organization, also in this multimodal approach where the second 15 university student may potentially be baseline pre-season, and then when they get a bang, they could go to the university nurse, get the scan again with the device or with the multiple biomarkers, and be tracked through the season, just like a normal first team player or professional player would, and give them that health record, that digital 3.0 health record that they can take through their, maybe bring it into the NHS, or they can at least take that record with them wherever they go in their career, so they know what kind of injuries they have. They now have a biomarker, just like a blood pressure or your pulse. They now have a brain biomarker that they can track with. And then you can imagine players even sitting at home looking at the phone app that they have, which measures all their concussion stats, and they can actually look how they are, how they're doing, whether they should go and play or not play, and they can decide whether they want to return to play or not. So from a university perspective, would you see a multimodal approach coming into being? Do you think it's worthwhile? Do you think students would sign up to it? Do you think they have enough urgency to do this kind of approach? And would you see multiple biomarkers working in this kind of environment?
Yeah, definitely. Really, multimodal is what we need to be approaching this with, because it very much depends on the symptoms that the individual shows as well with a lot of these biomarkers. And we need, just like with other neurological conditions like dementias, we need more than one biomarker so that we can be 100% sure that people do have these concussions, and then give them the right rehabilitation and treatment from that as well, based upon whatever the biomarkers are that are showing those problems. And I think really our students would be more than willing to sign up for these things, because a lot of university teams, I used to be the physiotherapist for Newcastle University's rugby team, and the players there actually paid for their own concussion assessments because they were so concerned about it. And I think this is something that really could be beneficial if we can have something that is based on a cloud storage system that could be done post-match by either the clinicians involved, by the players themselves potentially, and then really that could rule in or out suspected head injuries very clearly, and then they could track those reports and give those reports to their clinicians or various other people that might be involved in their play, such as coaches who may need to see those reports to see whether that person needs to stay off or not, so that it's tracked.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I know in South Africa, I mean, I'm from South Africa, from Durban originally, and even across the school system now, it's you're going to be tracked on your concussion on your record before you can actually play a game. So if you've had a concussion red mark, then you can't go and perform. So it's about bringing these biomarkers into a multimodal approach. So now we have valid biomarkers that give someone a scoring system, and then you record all the way through the system until the end of the season. You start fresh again with your baselining at the start of the following season. I mean, also recently in Ireland, so we just sanctioned a study in Ireland. It's been running for a couple of months. We've interviewed professional players and management, and also schoolboy, this case was rugby, schoolboy rugby headmasters, rugby coaches, and we've also interviewed players, both amateur and I mentioned also the professional players. So that report should be out in the next 2 months, but yeah, I suspect we're going to see a willingness across the board. And I certainly know, being a parent of an 18 and a 16-year-old rugby player, those guys, they will probably take on anything that's put in front of them. And if they were to be baseline in a school environment, I think they would enjoy it, because they'd know where they stand in terms of injury, potential injury prevention, and how they follow through with their season in terms of recording and mapping. So just to close then, this is, first of all, it's been a great interview, Sam, and thanks very much. It's an honor to be actually interviewing you on this. But in terms of the wider BUCS involvement here, because we've got a lot of people from BUCS on the call, how could BUCS potentially help you in Northumbria through a, say, potential collaboration to try and bring some of your research to a higher level through a collaborative approach and maybe a multi-university study?
Well, I think that's exactly right, David. I think multi-university studies are what we need to be doing. Ultimately, we need to have many more assessments done with these types of technologies and done on a vast array of different players, not just elite level athletes. We're talking about amateur level players, largely because if we can have a 1 to 2 year, or that's a 1 to 2 season study, depending on what sport you're playing, where we follow players up across multiple different universities, then we'll have much more in terms of acute head injuries that we can assess, and then we'd obviously have that capability to be able to track players over time much more easily. And if it is a simple tool that can be used by someone pitch side that is very simple, like your trigger device, the eye tracker device, I think that would be easily used by a physiotherapist or somebody else that might be involved in other university care.
Yeah, I agree. And I think devices that are repeatable, portable, affordable, have good utility and efficacy, I think is what we're looking for here across all the different devices that we'd bring into some kind of system to measure and monitor concussion. So, in summary, from my side, a head diagnostics perspective, we're pursuing the research, further research with our device. We hope to see some interesting feedback in multiple studies we have running at the moment. We have a study in emergency in Ireland, in an emergency department. We're working with an organization, a well-known body in the UK, the NIHR, on some different things as well. And we also, I mentioned, we've had a global approach on concussion in rugby, and we're hopefully going to be doing a professional study shortly. In terms of other areas, we also in the Parkinson's area, and I mentioned stroke as well. So we have lots of other avenues for the device in terms of brain injury and also brain disease. So from my perspective, Sam, delighted to chat to you. Thanks very much. We look forward to kicking off this project in around about October of this year. And no doubt, hopefully with Corona being under control at that point, I'll be over to see you face to face. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And I'll pass it back to Ben.
Thanks, Dal.
Perfect. Thanks very much for taking us through that, David and Sam. Concussion, clearly a very important area of discussion in sport at the moment, and something I've certainly seen appear more regularly in consideration for our members. I think anything that can improve our identification and treatment of concussion has to be a good thing. And it seems like the opportunity to be at the forefront of that kind of research would be really exciting. So hoping there's some collaboration work we can do there. And I certainly look forward to seeing how that progresses with your research work. So we'll now move on to the Q&A part of the session. So thank you to all the presenters so far. I can just ask everyone to join me on screen, please. Perfect. Thank you very much. We have had some questions submitted before the session, and there is still time if you have any further questions to just drop them into the Q&A. That would be grand, but we'll start with the pre-event questions. So Dara, the first question is for you actually. And that is, do you have any studies linking improvement in a specific measure to improvement in overall play in, for example, football or rugby?
Yeah, so I did see that question come through ahead of time. I might be peeking behind the window or the magic here as well with it. But I thought it was such an interesting question because that's at the core of why anyone like Mark does what they do, which is to get players fitter, faster, stronger. At Output, what we do is provide a tool or a mechanism to measure that with good levels of validity and reliability, and that's what we have an awful lot on the website at the moment with it that you can go through. But after that, it's the expertise of the coach or the physiotherapist that gets a player either back on a pitch or performing at their peak, and Output hopefully helps with that journey. But that area of research is actually something that we're really interested in, because otherwise, what's the point in collecting all of this data? What's the point in doing all of these tests if they don't actually translate to improvements in what you're trying to achieve, whether to be, run 100 meters faster or, last longer on a pitch or shorten a rehab process with it as well. So there would be an awful lot done around, Nordics. We measure Nordics around potentially preventative for hamstring injuries with it as well, VBT as well, around mechanisms of training within right zones and subsequently producing more force or power. And in, contact sport like rugby, you can imagine how that would be very beneficial around it. Not specifically Output, if that makes sense with it as well, because it never will be the tool that does that. It's the training mechanism, it's the process involved that does that with it. But at Output, hopefully what we will have demonstrated is that we provide a valid and reliable and user-friendly and portable manner of assessing those important performance indicators.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Dara. Yeah, absolutely right. That all the testing in the world is useless unless it's actually for an end goal. So that's really, really great to hear. Thanks very much. And David, a question for you. Which team or club, it says the question was, uses your product in the best way so far?
Yeah, so just to be clear, Ben, we're not a CE marked or FDA approved device. So we're still working that journey. And if you're in medical devices, you know it's a long journey. So our device is in study phase at the moment. We've done a local study here in Ireland with a team here, a UCD rugby team. It's like, it's professional AL Division 1. Where we baselined everyone. They got used to the device. I mean, the players absolutely loved the test because all they had to do is sit down 3 seconds in the eye. And we had a couple of different tests running. There was actually a SCAT5, there was a balance test, and our test. Our test was the quickest. We got through the players very quickly. So they liked the process. They found it very easy to do, and then it just goes on a platform and all those numbers come out. That got shut down because of COVID, because we're in the middle of the season, all closed down, and we haven't been with a sports team or a hospital. As Dara knows, it's quite tough in sports. So we focused on product for the last while. So the next phase now is to go back. We're going to be working with Sam. We've applied for a World Rugby grant application, so we'll know about that if that comes forward, and that'll be across 6 to 8 teams if we're successful there. We're looking to do something in the UK across rugby or soccer, and then we're speaking to South Africa about some things as well. So watch this space. There'll be more clubs and more professional teams hopefully coming on board where we can share some more information across BUCS later on.
Perfect, spot on. Thanks very much, David. Much appreciated. I haven't had any further questions added in to the chat for today, so it's time to me for just a bit of a roundup. So, firstly, a huge thank you to all of our panelists for today. Just brilliant insights on how we can utilize technology to improve the provision for athletes and practitioners, and a great mix of things that are existing products and research and where we're going in the future. So I'm definitely really excited for both Head Diagnostics and Output, and what we can see what our members can utilize them for. Before we finish off, though, we do have a quick poll question for everyone. So I'll ask one of the team in the background if they could just launch that poll, please. And if you could all just answer that would be grand. And while you're answering that, just carry on that we will share an email tomorrow, which will have a few key takeaways from the session and also a link to view the recorded webinar. A special thank you to Enterprise Ireland for their support of BUCS and the higher education sector, and to Output and Head Diagnostics for their time and expertise today. If you'd like to speak to Dara or to David after the event, we will include contact details in the post-event email. Alternatively, do feel free to drop our commercial team an email and we'll provide a direct introduction, as I know some of you have already requested. Finally, a big thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you found it informative and useful, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.